Well, Joseph, I can dive in whenever you'd like. I know you guys keep this very loose and informal, but
Well, we do, but you're the one with the schedule to keep. So anytime you want, Chief, take it away at any time you need to.
all right. Well, once again, I appreciate the organization doing this. I hope that we should spread the word about this because I hope more at-large organizations do this. Because what a great way to stay connected, and you guys keep it very, I say, loose and casual, and everyone's welcome. And I noticed mentioned about it, maybe this was April's first time calling in, and isn't that great? She found out about it, and we just hope for more of that across the country. So just to give you a little update on where things stand with the nation, we're still, obviously, as the whole country and the whole world is, we're dealing with COVID, and that's ongoing. The numbers are discouraging in Oklahoma because they're moving in the wrong direction. The community spread is intensifying. It's intensifying in Cherokee County, some in Adair County and Sequoyah County, and those are high population density areas. Rogers County is picking up. The Tulsa metro area is also going up, and we have a substantial population there. So we still feel confident about where we are in terms of our healthcare system not being overwhelmed, but that can change. And we're also affected by the capacity of the other hospitals. So we may send someone to another hospital, and our ability to do that is obviously limited by their capacity. My opinion is that the state of Oklahoma has not been very aggressive, or as aggressive as I would like to see them on COVID response. And by the way, I have a cat, and this cat is standing next to the tripod where this phone is perched. So if it goes over, that's why. But so we're dealing with that. And so just to kind of illustrate how that works, and I don't know what the local decisions are in your part of the country. At Sequoyah High School, we're going to substantially all virtual. We're doing a little bit of in-person to kind of acclimate the students to the technology we'll be using. And that'll be in a very controlled environment. So freshmen will come in for the Monday of the first week, and then sophomores the second. Juniors and seniors, Friday will be all virtual. So about the first couple of weeks, that's what we will do. So in any one day, there won't be more than a quarter of the student population there, and they'll be spread out. I honestly, the things that keep me up at night, that's one of them is the schools and what we're doing with Sequoyah High School. I think we're doing the right thing, and we're using the things we've had guided through this whole thing, which is medical science, facts, and then compassion for people. Now, not having kids in school has healthcare consequences for them and quality of life consequences for them. That's the other thing is if they're not in school, that might have been the best place for them all day and the safest place. And whether it's the safest place or not, there's meaningful interaction at school. But that's, I think, a sacrifice that for the short term we have to make in the name of public health, because we have teachers, there that are exposed. And every school in the country has to grapple with this. I think for us, another element is, I told you I went to a funeral of a fluent Cherokee speaker the other day. He didn't pass from COVID, but we have some that have passed from COVID. And when I think about the fact that we have less than 3,000 Cherokee speakers, and that these kids, come and go back to their communities, and many of them live with grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles who are our speakers. And that just sort of adds to the concern. Any life lost is one too many. For Cherokee people, if it impacts the sustainability of our language and our culture, there's an added concern. So that drove a lot of the decisions on Sequoyah. And I realize that's one school, and it's a very tiny sliver of the Cherokee population. But we've also curtailed athletics, at least for the first 9 weeks, which substantially means fall sports are canceled. We were the only school in the state that has done that. Some may have followed, but we certainly were the first. And the Oklahoma State Secondary Athletic Association announced today that football is full speed ahead. I think the Big 12 Conference, which includes the University of Oklahoma, I think they're full speed ahead. Not every conference in the country feels the same way. The Pac-12 canceled football. Big 10, I think the MAC conference. It does seem to me that some of these schools have resources that are, not bottomless wells of money, but pretty close in some of those schools. And they have determined that it's difficult to have competitive athletics and keep people safe. And that's what we think too. But it's not without some sacrifice for the young people. And it's concerning to me, of course, that some of these kids were going into senior year and this was going to be their year, and very special thing that athletics is, and other extracurricular activities. But we ultimately decided that if we're going to be driven by medical science, if we're going to be driven by facts, if we're going to be driven by compassion for not just the kids that go to school there, but the communities that they go back there, we had to make this decision. But we're doing it in an environment, we don't live in an island. On an island. We're not in a vacuum. And so a lot of schools are going back right now. And some schools are back in session across the Cherokee Nation. And I think, getting back to my first point about the spread, is I've got great concern that, the spread is going to be exacerbated by some of these activities. I hope not, but I don't have a great deal of confidence in it. There's not a mandatory mask requirement, which we feel strongly about at Cherokee Nation. We have, though, given $10,000 to every public school across our reservation, which is 107 school districts. And we're setting aside $1 million for the neediest schools. And so if you all have been to Cherokee Nation and you have family here or had family here, I'm talking about the very small schools that struggle in a good year, that are going to need extra help. And some of that extra help is going to be things like Wi-Fi connectivity that we are helping the students with. I'll get to that in a moment. But we think we have to help some of these schools with. Some of them might be as simple as making sure every kid's got a Wi-Fi hotspot. But then the other thing is, there's some places they live where there's not internet connectivity at all. What do you do about that? So we're trying to solve that problem by maybe making sure our community buildings are equipped with Wi-Fi. So there's a number of solutions we need to look at, because I think that more schools will go virtual in Oklahoma than are presently doing it, because I think that the numbers will start getting worse, and I think schools will start to feel the pressure to do something. I wish they would do something beforehand. Cherokee, we're not perfect, and I can't say we've made 100% every decision right through this pandemic, but we tried to realize, those of us who are not doctors and scientists, which includes me, have at least been smart enough to know we're not doctors and scientists. And I think if you do that as a public official, that's probably a good start, especially if you have good science people and medical people. And I just feel like I've got the best here. So that's where we are with schools. And that's my concern about the Cherokee Nation. And I'm really concerned about it, because I think the numbers are going the wrong direction. So that's one thing I want to mention. The grants for kids, we extended the deadline. We expanded the eligibility so that you just need to have a pending application. So we've had a lot of people send applications in. I don't know yet how much participation the at-large population has had in this program, but I suspect it's significant. I think we're somewhere around 40 to 50,000 kids have applied for this. Now, the total number of kids age 5 to 18 around the world, mostly the United States, that are Cherokee, is about 72,000. So we're not hitting that 72,000. I suspect many of those are people that aren't real connected with the Cherokee Nation. They may live in any of the 50 states where Cherokees live. I want to get to a point someday where we got full participation. And I want to get to a point someday where, even though this is a one-off opportunity because of this influx of federal funds, we all want to get to a place in the Cherokee Nation where we can do this on a more regular basis, because we recognize that Cherokee kids everywhere ought to have some help succeeding in the area of education. But this year we're able to do it, and I think it'll make a difference for kids. And that's that $400 grant, still available at Cherokee.org. The deadline is Friday, and that was the extended deadline. The other program we rolled out is for elders, also for elders living anywhere, a $400 grant. No income limit on this, just as with the student grant. And the idea there is give elders some extra funds to do their own COVID response. So it might be cleaning supplies, it might be food, it might be anything they need to get through, what we hope is a period of months before we're turning a corner in this country on a vaccine and things like that. So it's a fairly easy application, but for elders, there's some technology barriers. You give a kid a smartphone, they can apply quicker than you and I can find the page. Some elders can't do that. And so locally, we've been trying to help elders, and we were in Stillwell today, and we had, I bet you, 100 plus cars lined up, and we just did it, let them stay in their vehicle. We had gloves and masks on, and we just had our iPads out, signing them up. Not possible all over the country, but it's available. And if you know an elder who qualifies, which is just by age 62 or older, it's a real simple thing, and you could actually help them over the phone because you just need to get information from them and plug it in. So we're working on that. We're doing other things to make sure our healthcare system has the capacity it needs to weather what we think is a storm ahead. We're positioning ourselves to invest in some community buildings that will, in the short run, be used for COVID-related purposes. Maybe it's some drive-through testing. Maybe it is we have plans to produce our own PPE, specifically masks. We do that while the demand is high, and perhaps we scale back, and what's left after the pandemic has gone are buildings that we can repurpose in the community for needs such as community buildings and other things. Those will be assets that we have. So we're trying to balance these immediate needs with some of these longer term investments. The trick is getting it done this calendar year, because under the federal law, the CARES Act, that's what we're laboring under. So that's on the issue of COVID response. Happy to answer any questions. Had maybe one or two other topics I was going to hit on, but I can stop there if there's questions about any of the COVID related matters. All right, very good.
Not from me, but I do know Bob has applied for the Elders Grant, and I know of a few others in our group that as well. So I'm glad that we're able to help spread the word a little bit. And I commend everyone that's applied and done their part to help each other.
Well, that's wonderful, and those funds should go out to elders probably within a week or so of the deadline, which is August the 28th, and so we'll get those out the door. For the students, we hope by this time next week the money is going out, and somebody knows this. I've forgotten whether we're sending out pay cards or paper checks in our. What we'd love to do is to be able to, and you can do it these days if you get the right info, is directly send the money to the kid's bank account. That takes some sharing of information that I don't know that we were equipped to do immediately, and not everybody's comfortable with. But these days you can send money on Facebook just with a few clicks, so it's possible. But I think for now we'll probably pay cards or paper checks. We did boost the scholarship program by $750 for tech opportunities for kids, and scholarships are available to people all over the country. Different requirements if you're at large, an income guideline. One thing about all these programs, so I told you we budgeted for 72,000 kids age 5 to 18, and we're seeing what the numbers are. That's going to help us in the future, because I do want to get to a point where 100% of Cherokees participate everywhere, and that's just kind of a goal we all have to have over time. But I also think it'll help inform our judgment about at-large programs, because one thing we lack at the Cherokee Nation is a lot of data beyond where our citizens live. We have that. We know how their ages, but we don't have real good data beyond that. So we don't have income data. The United States can hit a couple of buttons and get census data and income tax. But a snapshot of a population. We can't do that. And so when we expand programs, we have to make the best educated guess we can about what the participation rate will be and to budget for that. But I think this exercise in making these grants available is going to tell us a lot about the at-large population and their participation. We also asked some demographic questions on there concerning income and things like that, not to get individual. We want to really look at it in the aggregate and say, okay, this is a better snapshot of our at-large population than we had. Maybe we can have a better comfort level about expanding some of these programs, knowing a little better about what the budget hit will be. So I think it'll be helpful for not just me, but future chiefs and councils. So just a comment on that. Yes, April.
I wonder, since this will be broadcast hopefully and available for other members, could you speak to a little bit of the stigma? I know the first time that I heard that there were funds, I thought, well, I'm sure we can do budget cuts in our own family and figure out ways not to apply and to impact the Cherokee Nation and give it to people who maybe need it more. That happens with veterans funds. It happens with so many different kinds of funds. So could you maybe speak to why people should be applying for these funds? And that is not taking from others, or why you would encourage it?
Well, I think they should first and foremost, because I think everyone in the country was affected by COVID in some way, and some people more insulated than others. But if you live in the economy, you're affected by it. Price of things gone up, your buying habits change, and sometimes that causes your budget to be more taxed for food and things of that nature. So our belief was everyone's affected, and maybe there was a way we could have done some means testing and had more, and we did that to some extent, but more for lower income. But with the time constraints we had, we really had to make it a broad program. So I think Cherokees, no matter where they live, no matter what their income, should feel comfortable. I would encourage them to participate, because this is one of those, we're all in it together. We all were affected in some way, some worse than others. And these funds, I will say, these funds were obtained. I could go through a whole probably evening telling you what a struggle it was to get these funds from the Congress, and then more so from the Treasury Department. But they actually gauged the funding based on what they call your NAHASDA formula. NAHASDA is Federal Indian Housing. So they really looked at your population in the 14 counties. They didn't actually go outside the 14 counties to look at those. We still felt that the Cherokee Nation, that with these resources and with Cherokees across the country that were affected, we had to do something. So I hope at-large folks and people of all incomes participate. I think, that's why we went and addressed kids' needs and elders' needs, because they're the folks, almost always, this fixed income, and elders have certain needs that I think are even more acutely impacted by COVID than other people. And then I think all over the country, kids are having to do more quickly to get ready for what's even a blended virtual environment for school. And, some people, maybe it's not an issue at all, but I think for most Cherokees all over the country, if you got to get a new iPad, or you got to get a hotspot, or you got to boost your Wi-Fi, that's going to hit your pocketbook, and we ought to be able to help for that. So I just encourage people to do it. It's not taking money away from other needs. We feel like we're meeting the other needs here on the reservation. For example, we did a clothing voucher for kids here on the reservation. We didn't extend that at large. I've gotten some comments about, why didn't you do that? And they're fair comments. They're absolutely fair. And I think my response is just, we're trying to expand, and we have to do it carefully, because we have to do it in a balanced way. And we also have to be mindful that, we got money based on a smaller population than we really have. And so stretching that requires, I think, some choices. And that was one of the choices.
Thank you for that, Chief.
Sure. So a couple more topics that I can think of. One is our holidays coming up, virtual holiday. The only thing not virtual about it that you folks won't get to see, unless we live stream it, maybe we will, is we're going to have a movie night at Cherokee Nation, which is a drive-in movie. So you drive in, we're going to show some things that haven't been seen before, a premiere of an OCO TV episode, a brand new animated cartoon that we created with a Cherokee-owned production company called Fire Thief. Fire Thief does a lot of the work on OCO TV. So you've seen their work, most likely, may not have known it was them. And the voice actors are Cherokee fluent speakers. And so this is and you'll get the chance to watch this. It'll be available online. And it centers around some of those, those animals that you're familiar with from Cherokee stories, the rabbit and possum and all of those critters that make up this landscape of all these stories. Some comes from kind of the Robert Lewis stories you all have heard before. So this is our first effort under a law we passed last year called the Durbin Feeling Language Preservation Act, where we put an historic amount of money into language preservation. And one of the things we said was, look, we've got really two goals here. One is to create a bigger supply of speakers. So we're using money to do that, train more speakers. The other is to create more demand for speakers. And you can only do that if you create a way for somebody to make a living being able to use their language. I mean, that's the world we live in. You have to be able to do that. Probably the world we've always lived in for language. That's why languages survive and some languages diminish. And so you've got Cherokees who can now be voice actors. And we hope to sort of spark an increase in some of the creative arts using our language, whether it's this kind of production or some other kind of production. And then you help with the supply of speakers, because this is going to be targeted mostly to kids. And in our immersion school, where a lot of the kids would have to listen to cartoons with the volume down and the teacher sort of saying what was going on, or the English subtitles. Now they can watch a cartoon that's made by their people in their language that they're trying to learn. I think that'll make a positive impact on the immersion. Now, all that got me off track from the holiday, but that's a thing we're going to premiere at the movie night. You guys will get a chance to see this cartoon in some form or fashion. There'll be some media rollout on this, but the holiday itself is going to be all accessible through social media and the website. We put something up today about that. So if you want to, engage with that, September, 1st through the 6th, something like that, maybe 3rd through the 6th. I should know these things, but be looking for that. We'll have it all online, and hopefully next year we'll have it back in person. So any questions or comments about the holiday? All right. Well, I wanted to touch also on McGirt. McGirt was a topic I think I touched on last time. So there's been a lot on McGirt. And some of it, frankly, I think has been some exaggeration, some misinformation. Everybody's got their bias. I have mine. And if I was debating someone here, it'd probably be an interesting debate stemming from our last council meeting. And that's fine. I mean, that's what our democracy is about. But here's my view on McGirt. McGirt, as you all recall, said that the reservation of the Creek Nation was never disestablished. And it's very simple to apply that to all of the 5 tribes, including Cherokee Nation. Most significant Supreme Court case in generations. I think you have to go back to the Cherokee cases of the 19th century to find one that's on par in terms of how much it sort of moved the ground beneath us. Here's what else I know. Well, by the way, that really means criminal jurisdiction is now under the Major Crimes Act and other laws stemming from that, which says that if it's an Indian on Indian crime, or a non-Indian on Indian crime, or an Indian on non-Indian crime, and it takes place on the reservation, which now essentially is the entire 14 counties, then it's subject to federal prosecution, tribal prosecution, but not state prosecution, which is a huge shift. And it's a shift that in practical terms raises a lot of questions about how do we do it as Cherokee Nation, and what does the government of the United States do in terms of federal prosecutors and marshals and prisons and courts and judges, all kinds of questions. And then there's you extrapolate from that some issues about civil jurisdiction, which weren't directly in the McGirt case, but which kind of flow, at least the questions flow from that. So the way I look at it is I want to make sure that McGirt is an enduring decision. Now, I said the Cherokee cases was the last time we had something this big. And let's remember what happened after the Cherokee cases, which we won. We won, and the Supreme Court recognized us as a special kind of sovereign, and that principle is still with us today. But what did Congress do after that? They passed the Indian Removal Act. That Congress didn't like the decision. Andrew Jackson gets tagged with that, as he should, but it was the Congress that passed the Indian Removal Act. So I don't think Congress is going to pass another Indian Removal Act for a variety of reasons, not the least of which that Oklahoma would fall apart if the Cherokees left Cherokee Nation, because sometimes I think we're the only thing propping it up. But I do think that the Congress, because it has great authority in this area, could do something damaging to the Cherokee Nation. I don't want that to happen. So I told the council, I said, Cherokee Nation has to be at the table, or we're going to be on the menu. And what I mean by that is if we're not engaged in what Congress does next, we're going to be on the menu. We're going to be devoured, and I don't want us devoured. And that may be too much of an extreme comment, but somewhere between nothing happening and us being devoured is probably where it is. We need to be involved in that. Got to make sure that whatever happens is sustainable. Cherokee Nation taking on all of the criminal jurisdiction is something that it would take a great deal of resources. And how does any government raise resources for a criminal justice system? Well, through a tax base. Our tax base is essentially actual taxes that are a small part of our budget, taxes on tobacco and some other retail activities. Mostly it's the dividend we get from our business, which isn't a tax, but it's essentially what we generate as revenue. So that's it. If we want to go beyond that, we'd start delving into areas that McGirt didn't fully answer, but it raises questions about our ability to tax and regulate. But to take on a criminal justice system the size of the 14 counties, which would be, one of the biggest in Oklahoma in terms of marshal service, courts, prosecutors, public defenders. There's a constitutional right to free counsel, and it would be applying to us as well. Those are questions that get to what a chief and a council has to deal with every day. So as I'm looking ahead to next year, I'm wanting to make sure we do things like save this language and continue with those efforts. And I'm looking at healthcare and the fact that our healthcare system is the biggest in Indian country, but it has to be because we have the biggest population and we got to expand it. I mean, we just expanded some eyeglass vouchers for at-large citizens the other day. That takes some resources. So as we want to expand that, we have to look at our budget. We have to look at our businesses, which are taking a hit right now. And I know they'll be back up, but we have to make sure we can sustain what we're doing. If you add on top of that a criminal justice system, you have to harness some federal funds, which the next time I trust the government of the United States to live up to its funding promise will be the first time that I trust them, because I know what the scorecard is. I know what they fall short on. So we could get some federal funds. If we want, there's that cat again. If we want to get some tribal funds, we have to make some choices about our revenue and what we do with it. And those are all things that as a chief and as council and as citizens, you have to think about and you have to work through. At the same time, you're looking at how wonderful it is to reclaim our reservation, which we have, and nothing is going to take that away. What could change in terms of Congress is what Congress does about the parameters of things like criminal jurisdiction. So my pledge to you is I've done my level best to fight for our sovereignty the whole time I've had the good fortune to be involved in the Cherokee Nation government at all, which goes back to our Constitutional Convention in 1999. And I always will. I also want to leave this nation whenever I leave office, 3 years, 7 years, who knows, next month, if I, get kicked out, which I hope not. But I want to leave the nation on a sustainable path so that all these things that we want, a good economy and opportunities for kids, language that's saved, healthcare that's just second to none. I want us to be able to do that and do the other things that a sovereign government has to do. And those are things that really come down to some really difficult decisions sometimes, particularly on the budget. But I want a future chief to be in a position and a council where they can do those things and not have looked back and think, well, Chief Hoskin really saddled us with something that really took us off track in terms of some of these other great interests that we have. Criminal justice is a high interest of any nation, but it's not the only interest. We got to balance all those things. So what's happening right now is we're working to make sure that that there is justice and police protection and everything across the 14 counties. And there is, but we have to stay engaged with local prosecutors and police. Fortunately, we have a good relationship with them. But these things are going to come up, and we've got to stay engaged. So I'm proposing some things to the council this month. Going to make some announcements tomorrow. You all are actually getting a sneak preview. That there's going to be some stuff announced on reservation protection, a task force to make sure we have all the knowledge that we need to make good decisions. I mean, I'm a firm believer in no matter how tough the decision is or easy the decision is, you want to have all the facts. And that's how you make the best decision, all the data. And so we're trying to assemble that. So those are things that you will be hearing about soon. So anyway, that's my McGirt update. Not a great deal to report other than that we're working on it. And we're working together. The council, I think, gave a great endorsement to the efforts that we're making last month.
Chief, I think messed up your screen a little bit.
What's that? The cat? Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it's a little blurry. There you go. That's a little better.
Yeah, get a little feedback there.
Is it for me? Okay, I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sherry.
Oh, okay. I think I understand what you're talking about as far as the nation being stretched on the McGirt issue. What I would like to just propose is if you have to scale it down or scale it out, is maybe to add, keep the violence against women issues. Because I think that the Native women should have the status of like endangered species. They get, like, if you're an endangered species, like an eagle, you get all these special resources.
I agree. And let me just interject for a moment. This was one of the things that was very frustrating for me over the past 2 or 3 weeks. We issued a statement of principles. We actually put in there that VAWA would be protected. And that didn't stop, though, some critics for saying this endangers VAWA. Not only does it not endanger VAWA, what I'd like to do under an approach to Congress is I'd like to permanently authorize VAWA. Right now, every 4 or 5 years, we have to go back to the Congress and convince the Congress that Native women ought to be protected. And we do. In fact, there's members of the Senate who think that this is all nonsense and we ought to rip out those protections that we fought so hard for. And I know I'm not trying to claim the mantle as the person who got VAWA done, but I was among those who advocated for VAWA. I'm never going to see that taken out without my most fierce fight. And so I think as Congress looks at this, what we ought to expect, what we ought to shoot for, is the permanent authorization. So we don't say that Indian women need protection for 5 years and we'll see if they still need it. We'll say Indian women ought to have protection in perpetuity. So if that's our approach, then I think that's an approach you'd be comfortable with. And I'm just telling you directly that that's my expectation. But under no circumstances does anything we're talking about take away protections from VAWA. And some folks that have said that, I think they spoke quickly, but I don't think they spoke with the full understanding of what we were talking about. But that's the reason that we have these discussions.
I wasn't coming at it from an angle that I thought that something was going to take it away. I just wanted to take this time to strengthen it.
I think if we can permanently authorize it, we can strengthen it.
Mm-hmm.
And in Oklahoma, we have a lot of work to do, even still under the existing VAWA, because there's certain things that you have to do to achieve the protections under that are triggered by that. Getting full reservation status helps that immensely. And if we can take the additional step of making permanent VAWA, then I think we've done something that we'll get to exactly what you mean. And I wasn't frustrated at you, but I was immediately hit with he's trying to take away VAWA, and I think that sort of it penetrates into people's understanding, and I just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah, I remember that statement, but yeah, I was just thinking of how special Native women are in a Native community, and just kind of going through that angle. Thank you.
Any other VAWA questions, or really it's an ask me anything situation? So fire away.
Yeah, this is Bob. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I heard the Attorney General speak at a press conference, the Oklahoma Attorney General, Mike Hunter, and he indicated that the state DHS had signed some agreements with some tribes, like the Chickasaws and even the Creek, and perhaps the Cherokees as well, on ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act. And he said that the tribes didn't have the bandwidth to handle these cases, and that was one of the reasons behind it. So that's a question I had when you're talking about resources.
Yeah.
Do we have the resources to handle the load for the non-major crimes that occur in Indian country?
Not at the moment, without making some major shifts in what we do, and not without harnessing some federal funds. That's sort of the general proposition. I mean, we don't have the number of prosecutors we need. We don't have the number of marshals. We don't have the number of courts and judges. Part of what I'm proposing to the council, that I'm kind of giving a sneak preview on it, is to make some expansions and put me in position to seek some of those federal dollars that can help us. Specifically on Indian children, one of the reasons that you won't see opposite, the Creeks came out initially in support of sort of working towards a congressional solution, and they very abruptly changed. But the reason you see even the Creeks accepting this, what is really a temporary agreement on it's equal, but it's basically protecting children, is because of that very reason. And the Attorney General using phrases like doesn't have the bandwidth. It doesn't taste very good, but it's true that we can't, and we wouldn't have been expected, I think, to have a system designed to cover the 14 counties just in case we got it. We have a system that's right sized, and every year we need to put some more into it, and we have for the areas that we do have jurisdiction over. So if we didn't, and by the way, this agreement has not been signed by the Cherokee Nation, but one will be, and the council is going to look at it with me by the end of this month. It's going to be on their agenda. But the conversations I've had, I'd say universal support for the idea that at least in the interim, we have to make sure that kids are protected. So if I go into a part of the Cherokee Nation, now the Cherokee Nation Reservation, that is on fee simple land, and there's a child abuse case, if the state of Oklahoma just said, well, we're going to wash our hands of it in terms of investigating and looking at it, it would be a terrible situation. No one would want that. And we would try our level best to help, but we'd be asking staff. So that's a long answer to your very precise question, which is we don't have the resources right now to do it. We couldn't flip a switch and do it quick enough. So we do need an interim agreement, and I'm confident we'll be signing one as the other tribes have.
Well, I'm kind of curious what direction we'd be going in after that. I used to be associate district judge in Payne County for 14 years, and I handled all kinds of cases, including the deprived cases. Or is it our plan to sort of walk back McGirt and give jurisdiction to the state, or is the plan to work on developing our own court system to handle these cases in the future and work towards that end?
Well, I think we have to do two things. So what I'm going to propose to the council is going to be an expansion of our judiciary. It's going to call for what I'd say is an interim expansion. So we'll have to do more expanding if all of McGirt, all the implications stay in place. That assumes a world in which the Congress of the United States says, oh, this is fine with us. Let's assume we live in that world. I don't think we do. But so we're going to take this interim step towards doing an interim expansion, which will involve kind of some special judges that can be assigned as caseloads arise. We're going to have a commission study the impact and make recommendations to answer the question, what do you need to take on all the implications of McGirt, certainly the criminal law implications, protecting children. And then we'll have to start looking at what our budget looks like and what resources we can harness to build this court system. So I think we have to go down that track, because even though I don't think we live in a world in which the Congress just says, oh, this is fine, we'd be irresponsible if we didn't plan for taking it all on. So that's what I'm doing and what I'll be proposing to the council. And that's what I'm asking my administration to do, is look at it all, tell me what we need to do, tell me what the costs are. But I'm also going to keep my eye on what's going on in Congress. And I've talked to members of the delegation. And I also know that there's, other people in the state of Oklahoma and other interests that are also talking to members of Congress. And they have their opinion about what should happen. My opinion is we don't disestablish our reservation, as the oil and gas industry has literally proposed. And I can't underscore that enough. They've literally proposed language that would disestablish our reservation. Now, that's the world that I live in, ladies and gentlemen, is that those interests are there, and I have to protect against those. I also know that I don't, as chief, get to dictate to the Congress what they do. I get to use the influence I have, the relationships I have, the might, if you will, of the Cherokee Nation in terms of our size and our impact, to persuade the Congress about what the right thing to do is. And in the time I've been in office, I've had some success at that. Haven't been in very long, but in my previous administration that I worked for, we had some success too. Tribes never bat 1,000, and the Cherokee Nation doesn't bat 1,000. But I think on this one, we have to make sure we protect it. Now, if the Congress tries to disestablish a reservation over my dead body, what we could see is a situation in which the Congress says, yes, federal law is needed to address McGirt, but let's leave it. Let's basically, through federal statute, empower the tribes to enter into agreements with the states. There's a lot of talk about, well, we can agree our way out of any issues. And that might be an interesting way, but it does take federal law. Not all of the tribal leaders agree with me on that. I think I'm right. I think that there has to be some federal action. But let's suppose there is, but it puts us in a position to, instead of immediately having to flip a switch and make just the most difficult decisions you can imagine on language and healthcare and scholarships and business investment to create jobs immediately, maybe it creates a slower path towards that, so that we are marching towards building up a court system, so that this study that I'm commissioning can inform policymakers about what we ought to do. And instead of having to next spring figure out a way to do this, we can look into the future and say, how can we plan to build up this court system? Because we have some agreement with the state that has a finite date on it, that if we don't renew, we take it off. So that's, in my mind, that's what makes this workable, is to take McGirt, which is a very immediate decision, and make it manageable. And that's what I mean by putting us on a sustainable path to making McGirt an enduring decision. Because here's what I don't want to see. I don't want to see the tribes get McGirt and not engage with Congress or the state and say, we got this, and then we don't got it. Because let's get down to brass tacks here. We are a democracy. We have a representative government. We're elected officials. We and our people, you all, everybody aspires that the Cherokee government do certain things, including healthcare. I think it's one of the biggest concerns here. Education opportunities, saving our culture, making sure our language isn't a thing in the history books here in a generation. We can't have that. And those are expectations that will continue. And then there's the expectations that we don't fail on criminal justice. What if we fail on criminal justice despite our best efforts because of these difficult decisions we have to make? What will the Congress do if the delegation from the state of Oklahoma says, you know what, this isn't working out because the tribes are not putting enough resources into criminal justice and protecting people, protecting communities? We can do it. The Cherokee people can do amazing things, but I also know that those amazing things take resources, and it takes tough decisions. And it's not just one chief deciding them. It's elected council members. It's the chief. It's the deputy chief. It's citizens weighing in. So I don't want to do it so quickly and hastily, and perhaps not adequately, that the Congress says, and our critics say, see, we told you so. You got to take this away from them. That's what my concern is.
Yeah, well, there's no way we could do it any worse than the state of Oklahoma's been doing it.
Well,
in criminal justice.
Point.
So, I mean, I lived in Oklahoma for 60 years, and like I said, I was on the bench for 14. It's and as far as child welfare goes, the state gets a lot of money from the federal government to run its child welfare system, and if we're taking on a load from them, we should get some of that bandwidth to where we can run it. And I mean, I'll finish up here, but anecdotally, I can remember when we had some cases with Cherokee citizens that came to Payne County, and I forget who the lawyer was that came over, but he was one of the best lawyers that appeared in my courtroom on Indian child welfare. And I even had another case where the Chickasaws took a case, and there was a local lawyer that was really against it, but I went ahead and ruled that it applied. And after a few months, he said, Judge, I hate to say this, but the Chickasaws are doing a better job in child welfare than the state of Oklahoma is. And he says, I don't mean any disrespect, but he says, we like the way they're doing it. So I think if it's a matter of resources, there'll be a transition time, but we're certainly entitled to the same resources that the state's been entitled to. And I hope
Yeah,
you'd make that case.
yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I think that if the resources that are available for Indian child welfare and child welfare more broadly, and Department of Justice grants and things of that nature for criminal justice, we're pretty adept at fighting for those, and we would. I think those things presuppose we have time to do that. So we're really good at saving the language, I think. We got a lot to do, but it's taken us time to get there. I think we're really good at economic development, but it took us time to get there. I think we're good at a variety of things, but over time we build up these capacities. And I think my concern that I'm trying to express to the Cherokee people and to the council is that we have to make sure we give ourselves time to do that, so that we do what, the best government in the state of Oklahoma is not the state of Oklahoma, it's the Cherokee Nation. And it was that way before I was chief. And hopefully I will do an adequate job. It will still be at least better than the state of Oklahoma in so many aspects. And I've said that publicly many times. But we got there because we have committed ourselves over time to investing our dollars, harnessing new dollars. So I am all for that. But I also know that flipping a switch could have some consequences that would, in the long run, hurt the Cherokee Nation. So I'm trying to keep that switch from flipping so quickly that we're just in a very difficult situation that could have some difficult impact on the nation.
Well, Joe tells me we've got 5,000 Cherokee citizens here in the state of Washington, and we're willing to do our part with the Washington delegation if you need any help there.
And we might, one strategy for this is preventing bad legislation. Right now, there's divided government within the Congress, and some aspects of the Congress can be a backstop to bad legislation. We have a good working relationship with our delegation, but there are times when we need to reach out. And one of the things I'd like to do, and I've talked about doing as chief, is, aside from McGirt, is there are issues where at-large Cherokees can engage. If just like any of us, if you get some basic information, you sort of absorb it, and you can go talk to your member of Congress, and not just McGirt, but which is important, and we may need to do a call out for citizens to do that. But there's other issues as well, and so I'd like to see us do more of that, because I know, when I've gone out at the at-large communities, the refrain has not been, "What can you do for us?" Even though that's a fair question that gets asked. It's, "What can we do to contribute as citizens?" And that's something you can do. So I appreciate that, Bob.
Yeah, well, there's 29 federally recognized tribes here in the state of Washington, so it's a big issue in Washington as well.
Good. I'm hoping that my cat doesn't see Mary's dog that keeps running in.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Glad to tackle whatever you'd like.
Oh,
How do you recommend our young kids get involved with? I mean, there's a lot going on within Cherokee Nation right now. How can our young kids just read the Phoenix, or how would you recommend our young kids to be involved now? Maybe they're in college or high school. Get them. It was a landmark case, and this is a critical moment in Indian country. How can we get our kids on board and passionate and learning and wanting to help? Or
Well, this is a good question, and actually, as you're asking this question, I realize I haven't thought enough about it. We probably don't do much at Cherokee Nation to communicate on civic matters with young people, and we ought to. We surely don't even do enough to communicate that with our own adult age citizens, and we ought to do more. And that was what I was talking about engaging the at-large community. So let me give that some thought. Kids kids of different ages can sort of wrap their minds around these different concepts if they're presented in the right way and questions are posed to them, and that's good. I mean, that's what's going to make the next generation of Cherokees Cherokee, is that they understand these issues and their culture and the civic aspect of it. So I'll give that some thought. I think the answer is I don't know. And sometimes I just got to be plain and say I don't know. But I think we ought to do some more, and maybe the Phoenix can play a role in that. Maybe the way we talk about McGirt, some of these other issues, we ought to think more about. We have a youth council. So as we're talking here, I'm thinking about some of these things. Our youth council, perhaps we could ask them, what would be a good way to communicate? Now, these folks are teenagers from high school to college, but what would be a good way to communicate some of these issues? They may have some ideas. We recently opened up our youth council to at large.
Yes.
It's difficult because typically it involves being able to come to the complex, but of course now we're doing everything by Zoom and WebEx, and it's working. So those are things probably young people can tell us and give us some good insight.
I might have my young daughter call them, reach out to them. That sounds like a good deal for the youth council.
Yeah, and we were going to have a youth summit right around the time the pandemic hit. I can remember being in my office, and the young lady who was in charge of that was coming in and saying, we're going to do this youth summit. It was 2 weeks away. At that time, you were still hoping you could do things in person. We said, no, we're not going to do it. But if we did a youth summit that was Zoom and maybe use that as a focus, our holiday theme this year is sovereignty. It was going to be that. We picked that before McGirt, by the way, but it just worked out nicely. Now, maybe we reschedule the youth summit and we make it, accessible through Zoom and things like that. Maybe we talk about these things and learn a bit more about how we ought to talk about them. So I really appreciate you asking that question, because frankly, it just didn't occur to me.
Comments about that. And I don't know if there is or has there been set up a web page for teenagers, or that's like a branch off of the Cherokee Nation site for them to go and connect and explore things with?
Yeah, I think the answer is no. The youth council, I think, has a Facebook page, and I've checked it a few times. I think they recently did some video biographies of some of the members, but there's another opportunity I think we're not seizing, is to use that as a resource for young people to get connected. So I'll take that as well to our youth council director and see what we can develop out of that.
This is April. I wanted to thank Shelley for highlighting missing and murdered. Oh, is somebody else's volume still on? The missing and murdered Indigenous women. So thank you for highlighting that. And it sure is exciting to think about not replicating the systems that are already in place if you were to, or we were to start handling some of these cases and situations where we could work on decreasing recidivism and eliminating racial disparities and so many of those things that impact folks in the criminal legal system. So I appreciate your going into it with eyes wide open, and I'd love to learn more about these things. I'm probably speaking out of turn because I haven't been as involved, but I agree with Bob in that we have in some cases more Cherokee members in Washington than some tribe size. And, I'm constantly advocating in the city of Bellingham and in Whatcom County for different rights for the Nooksack tribe that's here in the Lummi Nation, but I'm not quite sure what to do for the Cherokee Nation. And it sure would be great to harness the strength. And then, of course, to Shelley's point, to having opportunities for us and our children to learn not only what sovereignty means. I think I have a fairly good idea and a lot of the research and just working with the tribes here, but what that means, what the true history is, and then elevating that and moving us all forward. So like for me, Cherokee Nations helped me get through school, college, there's just been a lot that the nation has given to me, and trying to figure out ways that I can give back. But then also, maybe there's big issues for tribes here locally where we could just be better partners and use the strength of our large citizenship. So that's one of the things I'm really interested in, and I'm just gonna sit and learn a lot from all of you that have been doing so much work, and I'd really like to find ways that we can be more civically engaged. So thank you.
Oh, that was you, April, right? Was that April that was speaking?
Yes.
Yeah, she just muted herself.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. So two things. One, on missing and murdered Indigenous women, we advocated for a state law to, and it passed the House. I think it died in the Senate. We're going to take another run at it in the Oklahoma legislature to put some more resources into coordinating on those cases. We've tried, my wife in particular has been working with the Marshal Service to work on that issue and also human trafficking, which of course is a problem all over the country. What we're finding is we don't have the greatest data on human trafficking within the Cherokee Nation. And then missing and murdered Indigenous women, we know, is a problem that we're trying to address. And then, to your point again, I don't think we can say this enough about harnessing the size of our tribe population-wise where we are to move the needle on pieces of legislation in the Congress. I talked about it last time, and there's not been an update that no updates to share other than, we're still on what I think is a long journey to seat our delegate in the Congress. And I think that there'll come a time when we'll need to apply some pressure to members of Congress after we've kind of gone through sort of the education piece, which we're still working on. And that's something you all can get engaged on. Everybody's, this is probably going to come down to the House of Representatives seating it, because that's what the treaty says. Well, that's going to take a vote of the House. And I think even just hearing from Cherokees that live in whatever district in the state of Washington or Oregon or wherever, any state in the country, I think that'll be significant for a member of Congress to hear. So anyway, lots of opportunities out there. We've got a responsibility, Cherokee Nation, I think, to make some baseline of information and issues that are really broad-based, not really divisive issues within the nation, but broad-based issues available to all of our citizens.
Well, that sounds really good. I was going to tell you that I've become a sovereignty hobbyist. Thanks to our Oklahoma Attorney General, gave me something to do.
Yeah, the Oklahoma Attorney General said that, and when I read that, I cringed and wanted him to stop saying that.
Well, he gave me a mission. I wasn't sure what I was going to do in retirement, but when I heard that, I said, great. I tell you, we need to get hobbies, and so I've got one now.
He inspired you to be a sovereignty hobbyist, and the governor of the state of Oklahoma inspired all the tribes to stand in solidarity and protect our gaming compact. So sometimes those comments and actions backfire on the people making them. On the gaming compact, we did have a significant win recently in federal court. Mm-hmm. We said that the compact renewed, and boy, just about everybody that looked at it said the compact renewed, except the governor and the lawyers he ended up with, which was some outside counsel, to the tune of $1.5 million, which is small in a big scheme of a state budget, but a significant amount of money in a state that the revenue picture is not good. And it was a wasteful fight, and we won it. And we're still fighting it in different aspects. But the core of the issue, whether the compact renewed, has been resolved by a federal district judge. Of course, an appeal is possible. Most people think it would be futile. But anyway, we're very pleased with that. And that means we can rest assured we have a compact that's in place.
Yeah, the governor originally hired the Perkins Coie firm out here in Seattle to represent the state. Or represent him.
I think they dropped him. But
yeah, well, yeah, I know they got dropped, but I talked to my friends here, and they told me that Perkins Coie was sort of a famous firm in Washington for fighting tribal interests.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's true. I want to stress we have really great relationships with leaders in the state of Oklahoma. It's not true of the governor. And I would tell him if he was on this call, he'd probably say the same thing about me, but I'd be right. But but it's important because we do so much with the state of Oklahoma and having a good relationship, whether it's a county commissioner, a sheriff, the lieutenant governor of the state of Oklahoma that works on a lot of economic development things with us, the attorney general, who, notwithstanding that comment that hit me the way it hit you, Bob, has been somebody that's, I mean, he worked with us on protecting students who wanted to use eagle feathers at graduation because that was part of their culture. And you know, he did that because, in part, not only was the right thing to do, but he had good relationships with the tribes, and we encouraged him to do it. The leaders of the Oklahoma legislature, who are in the same party as the governor, agree with us. They agreed with us so much that they sued the governor over the compact, and they won a case the other day. So in Oklahoma, I think we've done a good job of developing relationships, and that's turns out to be in the best interest of the Cherokee Nation for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes we do have to draw the line and say, we got to fight this one. The compact was one of them. The sovereignty issue on McGirt, you know, lines will have to be drawn, but we've got to protect our interests, but we got to stay engaged. So I always figure we need all the friends we can get as long as we're moving in the right direction.
So you got friends out here.
And we need to remember that. I appreciate it. I have enjoyed the evening, and I'm not trying to run off. I know you guys probably have other things to discuss, but I would be glad to answer anything else. And
Jeannie, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, can I? Thank you. What a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting this. And I really wanted to, I got in late, so I don't know what was discussed prior. A big shout out to the $400 for the elders and then the school children. I know that is really going to help some families here in Portland. I'm in Vancouver. I'm part of Mount Hood Cherokees and Puget Sound. And my father, I helped, they were hesitant to apply for this, and then they wanted to somehow let the nation know. My father is at end of stage with a horrible disease, and it was able to provide, it's going to pay for 11 hours of caregiving. And that is a huge help to them right now because he's needing more and more hours as he's at the end of the MSA. And so thank you for thinking of the at-large people with, you know, financial help in addition to just the support that we are seeing, and then with communities getting online, and I was able to secure a basket weaving class for us, and I'm excited, things that we've been we want is happening now because of COVID. And so I'm really excited, and thank you so much, Wado.
And I so appreciate you sharing that story. I'm going to share that with our cabinet officials who worked on this and our director of human services. I mean, that's really one. I'm so sorry about your father, and glad that it can make a difference. And just to recap, I think we've recorded the deal so you can rewatch it. But you know, these programs are helping us learn more about the needs and learning more about how much resources we need in the future if we want to replicate something like this in the future. So COVID, absolute terrible thing that I wish would go away. And if I could, I'd make it go away. But while it's here, we need to remember to learn things from it as a government. And one of the things we're learning is capacity-wise what we can do for citizens here and at large. And hopefully that learning will inform what we can do, whether it's me, your future chiefs and councils.
I did have to get up, and I agree with that was a great story, Jeannie, and we appreciate that. And if there's anything that we can do to help, just let us know. And what is happening with the Trump visit? It's kind of died down on the Cherokee Nation site, but I'm wondering if there's any progress that's been made. And in the future, if you will be inviting, now that presidential nominee Biden has nominated his vice president, Kamala Harris, if those will be invited to the nation as well.
Yeah, was the first, it cut out there, was the first question about the First Lady?
Yes.
Okay, so we got a lot of feedback, different
Yeah.
different opinions on that. So here's, first of all, from the very beginning, we've had an open invitation to anybody running for president. We had some actually come here. Bernie Sanders came to Tahlequah. Another Democrat came to Tulsa and had a roundtable, there's been some of that go on. I think we had maybe our CEO of our businesses attended one of those because it was about economic development. The purpose of the First Lady's potential visit, although I will say frankly, since it was announced, we haven't heard any details. So, I'll update you as we get them. The Congress and the Indian Health Service in particular wanted to do a study on some pretty abhorrent things that happen in part of the Indian health system, not in Oklahoma, but elsewhere. And it was, as I recall, some abusive things that happened to some female patients and some just bad care. And it was, a terrible thing, but it was good that they wanted to look at what the problem was. So they rolled out a report, as the government does. And, the government of the United States, they can choose whoever they want to associate with that report. And so the two people associated with the report was the First Lady of the United States and the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Oklahoma, who's a really good partner with the Cherokee Nation. His name's Trent Shores. He works so good with us. So he sort of was the taskmaster of that report. The First Lady, I think, was sort of the face of it from the White House. What really happens in these things is, and I'm not trying to dodge that we invited the First Lady, because we did. What happens is they reach out to you and say, we want to see the best in Indian country healthcare to talk more about this report, which is to improve Indian healthcare. So it's good that the United States said, where's the best in Indian healthcare? And they came to Oklahoma. Part of the reason they did that's because of Trent Shores and his connection. But I think even if he hadn't been involved, frankly, if you look across the landscape of healthcare in Indian country, I think you'd be hard pressed to find where there's been more investment in healthcare, and it's long before I was here that started building up. It's good that we have that attention. And my view of it is that we ought to always invite federal officials if they want to see the best of something, because that usually ends up building some relationships, not just with the political person that's invited, but some of the staff that comes, and even some of the career staff with IHS that get a chance to come see the largest in the country outpatient health center or the medical school that we're building. We start talking about that with federal policymakers, then it starts to lead to other conversations. And that's, in fact, part of how the OSU Medical School happened. Is we announced our investment in healthcare a few years ago. Before I was chief, I was in the administration. I was on the council originally. And that started to get attention. And we started to have people coming here. And we had OSU come here. A call coming in. They said, hey, maybe a medical school. And Chief Baker sees that opportunity. So I'm a big believer in creating these situations where we can get the attention of policymakers. And before I was chief, I wore different hats in terms of my family's political pedigree. My father was in the state legislature for some time. And now as chief, I take that hat completely off and I welcome anybody. So if Vice President Biden would come to Cherokee Nation or Senator Harris would come, I would welcome it in a heartbeat. And maybe they will. But we've always made it clear that those invitations are open. Just want to give you some context about how that invitation happened.
Thank you, Chief, for answering that. Just had been wondering about it.
All right. I get more questions from you all than I sometimes get from our council. This has been wonderful.
And I think we're holding back.
Yeah, I mean, but I really enjoyed this and would be here as long as you all wanted to talk. So any other questions or comments?
Well, one for you, Chief Hoskin. As at-large citizens of the nation, what can we do to help you? You know, we're doing what we can, trying to meet like this. We would love to be able to reach out to our brothers and sisters in other satellite communities. It's difficult for us to reach them.
Yeah.
So, you know, how can we reach more people? How can we talk to more people? And how can we find the people in our region to, you know, incorporate them in our group as well?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is we've got the upcoming CCO conference, which is virtual, and I hope that you all are participating in that. One of the subjects I hope they broach is what groups have been doing in the pandemic to stay connected. You all have, I think, hit on exactly what organizations ought to do. And one thing you can do for me and the nation is share that at the CCO conference. And I've shared it with Kevin Stretch, our director of CCO. The other thing that we were working on before the pandemic hit, seems like I sort of view my life as before and after the pandemic, as we all do. But one of the things we had going on before, and we'll get back to it, is all the at-large groups we were seeing at the at-large meetings, we were having a little dinner afterwards with the leaders, and we were talking about what can we do to help build your participation. And one of the things we'd hear is, well, we need to connect with people that are here that we don't know. So the thing that I suggested was, well, even though our citizenship list is something that we got to keep in the government, it's just sort of a privacy thing, we could do a mailer on your behalf, not for when I'm coming out. You know, we do those mailers and generate a pretty good turnout, but just a mailer to help build your, when you guys are back in person, build your maybe a membership meeting. Or maybe we figure out a way to do it, even though our budget's going to be pretty tough this year, to do it, to invite people to this kind of gathering here. But I think what you can do is just keep up this good work. You guys have gotten creative and found a way to stay connected. I mean, I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was April. Somebody joined this call for the first time today, and she heard about it somewhere. We can help more people hear about it. We want to help you. So if you guys just keep doing this sort of thing, keep asking the questions you're asking. I wish every at-large group, if they all did that. Maybe I shouldn't ask for that right away. But I really have enjoyed this. I mean, just like the question about how can young people understand the concepts of sovereignty and McGirt better? I got to admit, I hadn't thought about that since McGirt came out, and I should have, and now I will. So keep doing this. Your open invitations, something I'll take up anytime I can. So I guess the short answer is keep up the good work, and we'll share your good news at the CCO conference.
Thank you, Chief Hoskin.
I have a quick question I probably should be talking to one of the at-large council's members. But if the nation was to do a mailing, not because the TIF and the big event is happening, but because we are engaged in our community still, will there be like active stuff about what is happening within those specific Cherokee communities? Or is it going to be just, by the way, did you happen to know this is happening? Is it,
Yeah, one way we could do it is, I don't know how your organization works in this regard, but some organizations will have a membership drive and they'll do what they can to invite people out. It's difficult to do that kind of outreach. We could coordinate and do that for you. You all design the mailer. Maybe we coordinate it when we send out one of our cultural presenters, which outside of COVID, we do a couple of times a year. And we build a membership drive around that. But again, you design the mailer, we just send it out because we have the database, and we do a radius around your organization and try to build turnout. That's one thing we could do. And if you all had your own programming that you wanted to promote, we could do that. I just think we need to be there with the ability to mail it out for you. And you all be there with the content. And if you want help with the content, like a cultural presenter, we could do that.
I appreciate that. And I'll work with you as much as I can to see what we can do to make that come to fruition.
That's good.